In this video, we're unraveling a haunting mystery, a cold case finally cracked after more than a decade of agonizing silence. A young college student vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unsettling clues, a loyal dog, and a trail of unanswered questions. What really happened in that quiet Arkansas home, and why did it take years for the truth to surface? Let's dive deep into the chilling story of Rebecca Gould. When Casey returned to his girlfriend's house, something felt immediately off. Rebecca wasn't there. Her car was parked in the garage. Her belongings were neatly in the bedroom. Her dog barked restlessly throughout the house, but there was no sign of her. Rebecca had come home for the weekend, and she had planned to spend time with both her family and Casey. So where had she gone? Could the boyfriend she adored have been involved in her sudden disappearance? Or was something more sinister at play? Rebecca was born on April 28th in the small town of Melbourne, Arkansas. She was one of four sisters, and although their parents divorced shortly after the youngest was born, the girls remained close-knit. They stayed with their mother but still visited their father regularly. The separation had been painful, but in time it only deepened the bond between the sisters. After graduating high school, Rebecca enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College in Fayetteville. Conveniently, one of her sisters was already studying there, and the two spent time together almost daily. Despite a full class schedule, they often drove the 40 kilometers home to visit family. Rebecca was 22 in September 2004, excited about the new semester and considering a transfer to the University of Arkansas, but she had decided to complete one more term first. That weekend, on September 19th, she and her sister went home, and Rebecca made plans to see her boyfriend, who lived nearby. She intended to return to college the next day with her sister, who had traveled with her in Rebecca's car. But when the agreed time came, Rebecca didn't show. Calls to her phone went unanswered. At first, her family wasn't overly concerned. Rebecca was an adult, and maybe she just decided to stay one more day. But as evening came and went with no word, worry began to set in. By the following day, panic was building. Rebecca hadn't contacted anyone, and her friends hadn't seen her either. Her mother finally called the police, convinced something was wrong. This wasn't like Rebecca. Police located Casey, Rebecca's boyfriend. He admitted she had stayed the night at his place and had dropped him off at the cafe where he worked at around 8:30 a.m. She was supposed to return to his house to pick up her belongings and her dog, and then come back to pick him up later. But she never did. Casey said he waited for her in the cafe parking lot, but eventually gave up and went to a party with friends. When officers arrived at Casey's house, Rebecca's car was still there. Her dog greeted them, agitated. Inside, they found her purse complete with her ID. According to Casey, Rebecca had packed a small overnight bag, but that was missing. It made no sense. Her car, her beloved dog, her bag, all left behind, yet she was gone. There were other unsettling details. The bed looked disturbed. The mattress wasn't aligned correctly. When the officers lifted it, they found large red stains underneath. Blood, unmistakably. More brown spots, likely dried blood, marked the walls and floor. Crumpled bed sheets bore red smears. Beneath the bathtub, officers found several bottles of bleach, suggesting someone had tried to clean up a crime scene. At this point, investigators feared the worst. Rebecca Gould might no longer be alive. While DNA testing on the blood would take days, suspicions grew rapidly. Forensics swept through the home while detectives continued questioning Casey. He insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He claimed he hadn't noticed the blood, hadn't smelled the bleach, and hadn't found it odd that Rebecca's car and things were still there. When asked about his movements, Casey told police he had gone to stay with friends Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. His alibi was confirmed by those friends, leaving detectives without enough to arrest him. Still, the cloud of suspicion lingered. Rebecca was last seen Monday morning. Police scoured the area and talked to everyone she knew. Eventually, they uncovered security footage from a nearby gas station. Rebecca had stopped for a breakfast sandwich and coffee not long after dropping Casey off. She had been seen by staff shortly after 8:30 a.m., consistent with Casey's timeline. Later, when police found the uneaten sandwich at Casey's house, it painted a grim picture. Rebecca had returned to the house, but something had gone horribly wrong soon after. Casey's co-workers confirmed he was at work when the presumed attack occurred. further distancing him from direct suspicion. But when the blood test results came back, they confirmed what investigators feared. The blood in the home belonged to Rebecca. No other DNA was found at the scene. With no clear suspect, police kept digging. They believed the attacker was someone close to Rebecca, someone who acted with disturbing ease. On September 27, 2004, 8 days after she disappeared, Rebecca Gould's body was discovered in Izard County, roughly 19 kilometers from Casey's home. A driver spotted it at the bottom of a slope, barely visible from the highway. The killer hadn't tried to hide her. There was no attempt to bury the body. It had been dumped carelessly, discarded like trash. The autopsy revealed Rebecca had been struck multiple times in the head with a heavy object, then strangled. There were no defensive wounds. She had likely been caught by surprise, attacked before she had time to react. There was no evidence of sexual assault. The investigation eventually pointed to a chilling detail: a possible murder weapon. One of the legs of a piano in Casey's home was missing. The shape of Rebecca's head wounds matched the size and contours of the missing leg. Despite the correlation, the police were unable to find the weapon, not in the house, and not near where her body was found. Although the police ruled out robbery, none of Rebecca's valuables were missing. They were left searching for a motive. Why would someone brutally murder a kind, intelligent young woman on the cusp of starting a new chapter in life? Why did it take so long for justice to catch up with her killer? This story is more than a cold case. It's a reflection of how even the most peaceful communities can hide dark secrets, and how sometimes the answers are right in front of us, hidden behind a veil of silence, fear, and the one detail no one wants to believe. The only things missing from the house were Rebecca's small bag and the leg of the piano. Nothing else had been taken. No electronics, no valuables. So theft was quickly ruled out. That left only one conclusion. This was personal. Whoever did this likely knew Rebecca well. They knew her schedule, knew her boyfriend would be at work that morning, and possibly even knew the layout of the house. There were no signs of a break-in, which suggested Rebecca had let her attacker in herself. After the attack, the killer didn't leave right away. He stayed in the house, scrubbing away bloodstains with bleach, trying to erase the traces of his violence. Only then did he load her body into a vehicle and drive away, discarding it like trash along a roadside ditch. But despite all this, the police had no physical evidence linking anyone to the crime. The investigation stalled. Detectives pursued every angle. They questioned hundreds of people, including neighbors, classmates, family, and friends of both Rebecca and Casey. They even looked into residents of nearby towns. The tips poured in, but none of them led anywhere. Most were vague suspicions, theories without substance. The case gradually grew cold. Over the years, the case was reopened multiple times and handed to new investigative teams. Still, nothing changed. There was no weapon, no eyewitness, and no clear motive. Even among seasoned detectives, no one could make sense of why anyone would want to kill Rebecca. It wasn't just the lack of evidence. It was the haunting strangeness of the case itself that drew attention from amateur sleuths, true crime fans, and investigative journalists across the country. One of them was George Jared, a reporter who had been following Rebecca's story from the beginning. His fascination with the case drove him to write a book and launch a show centered entirely on uncovering the truth behind her murder. Through his work, he met Jennifer Buchholz, a former police detective from Colorado who shared his obsession with the case. Together, they created an online community dedicated to discussing the investigation, sharing new information, and exploring theories. Their group quickly grew, drawing in members from all over the world. Then something odd happened. Among their most active members was a user named William Miller. At first, his deep involvement seemed like just another passionate true crime enthusiast. But something didn't sit right. Miller lived in the Philippines. Why would someone half a world away be so invested in a cold case from a small Arkansas town? He wasn't just reading posts. He was constantly sending private messages to admins, proposing theories, and dissecting evidence with unsettling intensity. He even offered alternative interpretations of key details, some of which bordered on manipulative. More concerning still, Miller displayed an eerie familiarity with the region, the crime scene, and nuances that weren't part of public knowledge. George and Jennifer took note. Something about this user felt off. They didn't want to tip him off by confronting him, so instead they quietly gathered more information. Fortunately, one of their group members had access to family history tools. After a quick investigation, the truth was revealed. William Miller was Casey's cousin. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. George and Jennifer wasted no time. They contacted law enforcement and shared everything they learned. When police re-examined the original case files, they discovered that Miller's name had been mentioned back in 2004. At the time, he told investigators he had traveled from Texas to help a family member and had only seen Casey briefly twice, once at the house and once outside. He claimed he had never gone inside the home. Back then, Miller's statements didn't raise red flags. But now, with his suspicious online activity and unexplained knowledge, investigators gave his file a closer look. What they found was alarming. Miller had a violent past. In 2002, he had been charged with the assault of a girl under 13. Later, his ex-wife accused him of breaking into her house and attacking her. But despite these charges, he never served time. Eventually, Miller fled the country, moved to the Philippines, started a family, and began working on offshore oil rigs. Due to his location, the police were unable to bring him in for further questioning. He was beyond their reach. All they could do was wait and hope he'd eventually return to the U.S. For years, there was silence. Then in 2020, a call came in from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. William Miller had returned. He was back on American soil, reportedly living with his mother in Oregon. When police reached out to William Miller's mother, she claimed she hadn't seen her son in a long time, even though officers already knew he was back in town. It didn't take long for them to realize she was lying. With that confirmed, they traveled to Oregon in person to speak with Miller directly. Since there was still no physical evidence tying him to the crime, the officers had to rely on strategy, subtle pressure, and psychological tactics to get a confession. One of the lead investigators devised a plan. He approached Miller casually, telling him they were simply revisiting all the details of the Rebecca Gould case. Miller, pretending he had nothing to hide, agreed to talk. He even said he'd help in any way he could. Then, in a move designed to catch him off guard, the detective casually asked Miller if he'd be willing to take a polygraph test when he returned to Arkansas. Without hesitation, Miller agreed. But the moment the officer mentioned he would call the police chief to see if a polygraph expert was available, Miller grew tense. His demeanor shifted. He tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, not knowing that an expert was already waiting in the next room. Although polygraphs are controversial and not admissible in court, the police didn't care. They weren't after legal proof. They were hoping to shake Miller to knock him off balance enough to get the truth. And it worked. Miller continued to act uneasy, reluctantly agreed to take the test, knowing that refusing might raise even more suspicion. When he asked if the results could be used in court, the detective gave a vague answer, saying there were special circumstances, but didn't go into detail. Unsurprisingly, Miller failed the polygraph. He lied about every critical point, including whether he had harmed Rebecca. Still, the police didn't back down. They told him, falsely, that forensic experts had retested samples from his old vehicle and discovered Rebecca's DNA inside. In truth, Miller's car had been searched back in 2004, but no samples had been collected or tested. The claim was a bluff, an intentional and legal lie, commonly used during interrogations to corner suspects into telling the truth. And it worked. After a long silence, Miller finally spoke. He denied killing Rebecca, but claimed he had found her body by accident. That morning, he said, he was walking through the woods near Casey's house, thinking about Rebecca, whom he'd seen the day before. Convinced that Casey was already at work, he knocked on the door and told Rebecca he needed to make a phone call. She let him in, then returned to her bedroom to give him privacy. But instead of using the phone, something inside him snapped. Miller said he was overwhelmed by a violent impulse. He stormed into the bedroom, grabbed the loose leg of a piano, and struck Rebecca multiple times while she lay on the bed. Then he strangled her. After killing her, Miller wrapped the body in a sheet. He spent hours trying to clean the blood from the walls, floors, and bedding with bleach. Then he loaded her into his vehicle, drove onto the highway, and dumped her body off a cliff. Chillingly, he said there was no clear reason, just an uncontrollable urge to kill her. He admitted to feeling guilt for years and said it was time to take responsibility. Following his confession, William Miller was arrested and extradited to Arkansas. But once he arrived, he changed his plea and claimed he was innocent, throwing the case into potential jeopardy. Fortunately, the judge ruled that the videotaped confession was admissible. Even though no physical evidence linked to the murder, Miller knew intimate details of the crime, details that hadn't been made public. He also knew his cousin's schedule and had clearly planned the encounter. In truth, Miller could have walked away free. There was no warrant, no evidence, and no obligation for him to stay in Oregon. He could have simply left the station, booked a flight to the Philippines, and vanished forever. The case would have gone cold again. But he didn't. Somewhere deep inside, it seemed William Miller wanted to confess. He had been leaving clues all along: cryptic messages in the online blog group, persistent interactions with the administrators, subtle hints that only made sense in hindsight. If he had remained silent, it's likely no one would have ever known what truly happened to Rebecca Gould. But the guilt, like a weight he had carried for years, finally became too much. He chose to talk. Eventually, Miller accepted a plea deal, and in 2022, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But the story didn't end there. Once behind bars, he began to talk even more. To the shock of investigators, Miller confessed to murdering 5 other women over the course of his life. He couldn't remember their names, just their faces. He described how he lured them into his vehicle, drove them into the woods, and killed them. His victims, he admitted, all shared a similar appearance. Young, blonde, petite, just like Rebecca. This revelation confirmed what many feared. Rebecca hadn't been Miller's only victim. She had been one of several, chosen not by chance, but by a twisted, calculated pattern. Law enforcement quickly recognized that her profile matched his preferences perfectly. As of now, the investigation into William Miller's crimes continues, uncovering layers of horror that had remained hidden for decades. Thank you for watching. If this story gripped you, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more true crime stories where justice never quits. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep seeking the truth.